Hey, welcome back, everyone. We have a special episode today, a follow-up to what we talked about yesterday on the World Economic Forum, really running the show on food, tied to the United Nations Agenda 2030 and what they call Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we're going to have a special guest today in just a bit, Alex Newman. Many of you have seen him previous on the show. He's an award-winning international journalist, and he's going to be talking about what exactly is going on with the World Economic Forum, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Netherlands, the food crisis happening there, and these weird regulations on food happening all over the world. Also, folks, after that, we're going to go into some of the return of the viruses, the new variant of COVID-19, the new hemorrhagic fever virus they have, a lot of weird developments, and of course, government agencies around the world talking about new restrictions based on these. Also, there's some odd drills taking place right now on biological warfare and nuclear warfare, including a weird drill they just had in New York warning about a nuclear weapons attack. Interesting show today. Stick around for it. Those of you on YouTube, we're going to do the interview with Alex first today, so great stuff coming up in just a bit. But we're going to do a lot of the episode after that on Epic TV exclusively after about 25-ish minutes. So if you don't have an account yet, be sure to grab that. We're giving you a free trial. Link in the description below the video. All right, that's us. Bring on Alex Newman. Those of you who don't know, Alex is a great friend of ours. Have him on the show pretty often. Alex is an award-winning international journalist. And Alex, always a pleasure having you on.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Josh.
Alex, it's interesting. I was watching what's happening in the Netherlands. I had on Michael Jan, and Michael Jan was talking about, he said, oh yeah, like the World Economic Forum, Davos, they're involved. I was like, what? Like, how is the World Economic Forum involved with the Netherlands? And I looked into it, and I did a whole episode on it yesterday. And yes, they signed on with the World Economic Forum last year. And sure enough, their policies are the Netherlands is the flagship program for what they call these world food hubs. And sure enough, this is absolutely part of their agenda, tied into the United Nations Agenda 2030. Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to talk to you about that. So, first off, can you tell us what these Sustainable Development Goals are and why is this affecting the food and fertilizers?
Well, again, thanks for having me on the program, Josh. And the UN Agenda 2030, it's hard to overstate the importance of this. So the Sustainable Development Goals are the UN Agenda 2030. They have 17 specific goals and then 169 targets under those goals. And if you listen to the rhetoric when it was being drafted, and in fact, I covered it extensively, the head of the UN General Assembly, Peter Thompson, was actually calling it the master plan for humanity. Right. So these bombastic statements. And you had the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, Ban Ki-moon. He called this the Global Declaration of Interdependence, which in my opinion was a direct swipe at our Declaration of Independence.
Interdependence.
That's right. Yeah. So instead of it being independent nations, we'll all be now interdependent. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about it was how warm and fuzzy the dictators felt about this. You had the mass murdering, genocidal Marxist enslaving Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, say that this was going to usher in this brave new world and it was going to be so wonderful. You had the Communist Party of China coming out and through all of its propaganda organs bragging that they had played a critical role in developing this. So it's a very, very significant agreement. It basically covers every element of human life, every element of the economy. Goal number 2 actually deals specifically with food. And the World Economic Forum fits into this puzzle because the World Economic Forum, actually, they came to an official and public agreement with the UN that they would bring the business community to the table on these so-called sustainable development goals. Now, I'm sure we don't have time to go through all 17 of them, but I'll just say it really is, in my view, a roadmap to a socialistic, fascistic, communistic style global system. And they're pretty open about it. I mean, if you go to some of the goals, they say we need to redistribute the wealth, not just within the nations, but among the nations. So we're talking about global wealth redistribution. They specifically say that we need to change the way that we consume and produce goods, which, if the government nationalizes them outright, we call that communism. If the government just simply seizes control of them through other means, we call it fascism or national socialism. So very, very dangerous. And again, food is goal number 2. And they make very clear that the food supply is going to be a major piece of this, Josh.
Yeah, well, that's what I was reading. Yeah, I mean, I did a whole episode on it yesterday. So those of you interested in kind of the facts and the actual source websites, watch the episode yesterday. But that's what I found actually. And so basically, a lot of this appears to have started last year. Last year, you had several key things take place right before a major United Nations meeting specifically on food. And again, the head of, I believe, the prime minister, like, not president, right? Prime minister of the Netherlands, actually gave a speech. And I showed the video of his speech, and he's talking about how they're getting on board, and they're going to be the flagship program of this. And the World Economic Forum is assigning a global secretariat. They actually call it that, the global secretariat, assigned to the Netherlands to help them run these things. And they're going to basically, the Netherlands is like the global coordinating factor in this new weird agenda they have with food and farms. Alex, what do you know about the kind of WEF/UN agenda when it comes to food and farms specifically?
Well, I think one thing that is absolutely clear, Josh, is they want to completely redesign it. And they actually gave away the game really early on. While they were trying to define sustainable development, this was back in the 1970s, in the run-up to the Brundtland Commission that eventually kind of defined sustainable development and laid out the whole agenda. They had a meeting in 1976 in Vancouver, and they came out with a report, the Habitat 1 report. And this is a direct quote from this report. Okay, this is 1976 in the run-up to formalizing the whole sustainable development agenda. They said that land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. So as far as I'm concerned, they let the cat out of the bag. They ultimately want to get rid of private land ownership. And we see this all over the world. This is not just happening in the Netherlands, Josh. I've been covering this story for over a decade. There is a war taking place. I think war is the correct word. A war against farmers, ranchers, especially those who are independent, especially those who aren't part of the system, if you will. And so if you look at the end goal here, they want to remove small farmers, even medium farmers, from their land, and they want to bring it all under the control of these I think there's no other term to describe it, fascistic public-private partnerships. So in China, we see they're herding all the peasants off of the land and moving them into these mega cities that they built.
Right.
In South Africa, they're just outright murdering farmers. I mean, Donald Trump tweeted about this while he was president. Why are they killing all the farmers? You have the former president singing about murdering all the farmers. In Brazil, they're doing the same thing, shutting down huge areas of agriculture and saying they're going to give all the land back to Indians or something like that. In America, we just got this new SEC rule that they're working on that's, I mean, they're saying is going to bankrupt small and medium farmers. So I think the goal is to get all of these independent producers off the land and then have these mega corporations take it over. And when they say they want it to be sustainable, we need to understand that means something very different than what we've been led to believe. It's, in my opinion, an agenda of total control. And if you control the food supply, you control everything.
Well, you're touching on a few things that I've kind of been coming across. So yesterday, one thing I noticed the United Nations says in their own documents is they want to use the power of food as the tool to achieve their other goals. And, when I read that, it kind of took a bit to set in. I was like, wait a second, use the power of food to achieve the 17 goals of this, again, sustainable development program they have. What would food have to do with like racial justice and gender equality and stuff like that? Like, how does that tie together? It doesn't make sense. And it comes together. Yeah, it's because exactly as I said, they want to use the power of food over people in order to use that as like the tool to achieve that. And like you said, Alex, you're saying that in terms of the narrative that came up with the 1970s, and that's interesting because it sounds like what they're saying is they want to get rid of private land ownership. Again, they say that's a source of injustice and so on. That sounds like something straight out of like Lenin's playbook or Mao Zedong's playbook. And saying that, they want to get rid of the capitalistic system. I mean, how much more communist could you get with that? And real quick, too, Roman Baumikov, he does their show Facts Matter. He just got back from the Netherlands. I was just talking with him. He was saying he was talking to the farmers there, and they're telling him that they all believe that this is a plot from the government in the Netherlands to seize their farmland. Because they're saying that there are technologies they could get that cost less than what the government's doing right now that would fix the problem, and they don't want to do that. And based on the fact they're not trying to fix the problem using a cheaper solution, they believe the goal of this is, again, to take their farms. And, Alex, I mean, on that note, like, this idea of the power of food is the tool to achieve this, and frankly, it aligns with what we've seen previously in communist countries. Like they always cause famine and are always target the farmers. What do you know about kind of the agenda of that, just going by communist doctrine?
Well, one of the things that the communists love to do is create scarcity and create dependence. As long as you have independent people who are able to take care of themselves, there really is no need for the government to run your life and to control everything that you do. And so, as long as there are, and America is a good example, is as long as the food production is widely diffused and it's in the hands of independent producers, it becomes very difficult to get people to bend to your will. Now, this whole idea of using food as a weapon, yes, it's been a hallmark of communist regimes for 100 years. It's also been a hallmark of the very same people who are openly promoting the UN Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, and even the World Economic Forum. Back in 1974, Henry Kissinger, who was serving as national security advisor at the time, he put out the infamous National Security Memo 200. And he openly talked about, this was a classified document at the time, but it's since been declassified. He talked about using food as a weapon against governments around the world to get them to implement the policies that the US government wanted pursued. One of those policies was population control and sterilization. Now, we know the communist Chinese did that probably more vigorously than anybody else. But we also know it was official U.S. policy to try to encourage, in my opinion, a draconian and brutal population control measures all over the world under the pretext that population growth in the third world was somehow a threat to national security in the United States. And they openly discuss using food as a weapon, as a lever to try to get these policies imposed. So we have the communist regimes of the world. We have the internationalists here in the United States, all openly for many decades, in fact, for generations, talking about using food as a weapon. And now we see it coming to fruition. We see that really, I think, the controlled demolition of our food supply. And they want to completely restructure it. They want to have total centralized control of that, because just as the communists figured out, that gives you absolute power over everybody under your jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know you don't have a lot of time today, so I won't keep you too much longer. But this ties into some of the stuff I've been researching as well. Like yesterday, I mean, it totally aligns with everything you're saying, because it seems like these SDGs, these sustainable development goals, when you dig into them, on the surface they sound great. I mean, who doesn't want to feed the poor and feed breastfeeding women and make sure there's no malnourished children? You're reading this, great. I don't like seeing children malnourished. Wonderful. We can help them all we can. But you dig into the meat of what they're talking about, and it looks like what they're talking about is basically a system where absolutely everything in every society in the entire world is absolutely controlled by the government, and then what they call these multi-stakeholders or stakeholders. And when you hear stakeholder, they're talking about small farm owners and so on, and you think, okay, they want to work with like grassroots people. Alex, what do they really mean by these stakeholders? Because they're talking about small farm owners and so on. Is it really about that? Like, what is it?
Now, one of the things that they have done to purport to represent the small farmers is that they've created these associations, these trade industry groups that are completely under their control. And then they purport to speak for small farmers, and all along they're actually betraying the interests of their constituents. So we've seen that all over the world.
Is this the WEF, or who is this?
No, I'm talking about the internationalists and all of their different apparatuses. We've got several of these groups in the United States, and I've actually spoken to numerous ranchers and farmers here in the United States who've explained that a lot of these trade associations are actually betraying the interests of their members. So I think the best way to understand the model that they're pursuing is to look at communist China. They may not outright nationalize everything and have the government control everything, but what it'll be and what they're eventually hoping for, and if you read their documents, it becomes very clear, is a system where the government and the mega corporations are working together as stakeholders, as partners. They very often now call it a public-private partnership in total centralized control of the food supply. So yes, just like in Nazi Germany, you can still on paper own the farm. You'll still have private companies ostensibly managing these things, but ultimately the private companies will be taking their orders from the government. And we see that transition even in the United States. Nobody wants to acknowledge it yet, but that's what this whole move toward environmental social governance, the ESG metrics. This is all a move to hijack control of the business sector, of the individual companies, and put them at the service of the goals of what I call the predator class, the people behind the World Economic Forum, behind the United Nations. And this is the model that they want globally. And they've also told us some really troubling things. They want to move toward eating bugs. In fact, I first reported on this almost a decade ago. The UN put out a report. It is true. It sounds crazy, but it's absolutely true. They've been pushing it for a decade. Now they're promoting it on the propaganda media in the United States, on the tax-funded broadcasters. So we need to be aware that this is an agenda for total centralization of the food supply. The food supply, of course, is just one component of it, but it's a critical one, along with energy and other things, because that'll allow them to control humanity. That's where they're going with this.
Now, Alex, I'd love to talk to you for hours about this, but I know you have another interview. But I guess just last question. Now, people always ask me, like, what can we do to stop this? What can we do? What would you tell people? What can they do?
Well, I would say for one, right now, and I mean right now, when you're done watching this program, share it out and then go get to work finding alternative sources of food. I tell people, right, you need to have a relationship with the local farmers in your community. Get to the local farmers market, deal with the local farmers, come up with some agreement. There's a whole bunch of services popping up here in my area where for $100 a week, they'll deliver you fresh seasonal produce from the local farms. We need to get back to this kind of local model. We need to, I think, really start providing an alternative economic structure, because if we let them get control of the entire food supply, I guarantee you it will be used as a weapon to take your freedom, to get you to do things you otherwise wouldn't want to do, to undermine the sovereignty of your nation, whether you're in the United States or another country, and ultimately to dispossess people of their private land and of their freedom. So we've got to be taking this real seriously. If you have agricultural land, do not sell out to these people. They're trying to bribe the farmers to leave their land. We're seeing it in the Netherlands right now. In South Africa, they want to do it even without compensation. They're just talking about expropriation.
In the UK, they're paying people to stop farming. That's right.
And they do it here too. I just talked to a farmer in North Dakota. The federal government paid him more money to lock up his 250 acres for the next 10 years than he could have ever possibly made farming. And you see now Bill Gates and Ted Turner and these billionaires who obviously don't have our best interests in mind coming in and buying up huge tracts of land. So folks, get to know your local farmers. I can't encourage it highly enough. Don't be dependent on the centralized food supply that they're trying to impose on us. Make sure there are alternatives.
Hey, Alex, always a pleasure. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh. Great to be here.
And folks, again, that's Alex Newman. He's actually a contributor for the Epoch Times as well, but he does a lot of work actually. Fantastic journalist. And actually, I had an idea just the other day because I was thinking about, man, what do we do about the food? Why don't we all start up something? No matter whether you're in an apartment, you have your own house. Let's all start our own gardens. How about that? Start our own freedom gardens. I live in an apartment, so I was thinking about getting like a window setup, window gardening. You can do it. Let's start this movement, folks. Everyone start a garden. We'll start some movement on it. Start growing some of your own food as much as you can, and don't let them win, right? All right. That said, let's jump into some more stories. I want to talk about. Well, let me see where we're at. Actually, we'll go a bit more. I'll go the next part, then we'll jump over to Epic TV. But I want to talk a bit about a few other things, folks. I want to talk about right now this new variant of COVID, because there's some weird movements happening right now. We see now that different governments in different parts of the world, including right here in the United States, are trying to roll back a lot of the social controls that they get from having a pandemic. They're not wanting to let go, to relinquish of this idea of the pandemic. And we see now new viruses coming about, the same ones we've heard before, but new variants. There's the new COVID and there's the new Marburg virus. Remember, it was monkeypox. Now they have a new one, this new hemorrhagic fever. So first of all, let me show you the new Ninja COVID variant, they're calling it. This is the nickname the media came up with. This is the Daily Beast, and they're saying the latest subvariant of the novel coronavirus to become dominant in Europe, the United States, and other places is also in many ways the worst so far. Remember, they said that about Omicron. Omicron was not only not as bad, but actually gave a lot of people natural immunity because of the high infection rate and low death rate. But they're saying the worst so far. Remember, Biden had his winter of death. The winter of death is coming. Yeah, worst variant so far, right? We'll see what happens this time. But they're saying this new variant, the BA.5 subvariant of the basic Omicron variant, appears to be more contagious than any previous form of the virus. Yeah, like Omicron, right? Again, if it's more infectious, that means more people get it, more people become immune because they develop the antibodies. That is, unless Of course, the death rate is higher, which it's not showing signs of. They're saying basically it's better at dodging the antibodies. So they also believe that if you have the antibodies, it can maybe still infect you, which means you'll all be immune to a new variant, something that's not more dangerous. They say vaccines and boosters are still the best defense, although science would say otherwise currently. There are even Omicron-specific booster jabs in development in the coming months that could make the best vaccines more effective against BA.5 and its genetic cousins. This is the Daily Beast is basically doing a sales pitch for the new variants of the not the virus, but the new variants of the vaccine. Right? They're not telling about the variants of the virus in this article. It's more about variants in the vaccines and what you can do to get the new variant. Now, while this is happening, actually, they're making a big deal about this BA.5 variant, this new one coming out. And they're using this as an excuse, of course, to try to roll out not only, again, new types of vaccines. Tomorrow, I'm going to go in depth on this because what they're talking about now are what they call universal vaccines. And if you go back in history, back in 2009, Dr. Fauci was talking about creating universal vaccines that would basically be a form of like social control, right? Regular mandatory vaccinations. Pfizer, as we speak, is trying to create those. And previously, before this new announcements, they were saying annual vaccines every single year, the never-ending pandemic. That's what they have in mind with this. But again, we're going to go in depth on that tomorrow. But I'm going to go a bit deeper into this, what's happening with these new variants today. So in New York already, they want to roll back face masks. And they're not talking about the regular cloth masks. Now they're saying N95s and these like basically respirator masks. Let me show you this. Gateway Pundit has it. They said, here we go. New York City mask advisory is back. Health officials tell New Yorkers to wear N95 masks indoors and around crowds outside. And if you're in New York, there's a crowd everywhere, so they mean wear it everywhere. It says New York City health officials told New Yorkers to wear a high-quality mask, such as an N95, KN95, or KF94 in all public indoor settings and around crowds outside. In other words, everywhere. There's always a crowd outside in New York, and if you're not outside New York, you're inside, and they say wear a mask in either case. They continue stating, this health official, we're currently seeing high levels of COVID-19 in New York City. And the new advisory was issued due to the fast-spreading Omicron variant BA.5. You're going to be hearing a lot more about BA.5 because that's the new linchpin for these new policies. Now, remember previously, the CDC itself, and I mean, you could get in trouble for saying this on YouTube. We'll see if they get mad at me for saying it. The CDC itself acknowledged that the cloth masks do not work. The cloth masks did nothing. We were wearing them for nothing. I mean, Fauci himself said this previously. Fauci himself acknowledged this previously and then walked back his comments because it became a political issue, not a health issue. Now, they said that the N95 masks do give some degree of protection, although it's not that much. And so now they're closing the loop, closing that little loophole left by saying, okay, time to wear these higher quality masks. Now, on this note, you're also seeing this happen in other places. Australia, for example, a Victorian health minister is saying they're not going to rule out mask mandates and working from home orders as COVID-19 cases surge. In other words, they're not only talking about mask mandates, they're talking about bringing back lockdowns, right? Work from home mandates. That's a nice way of saying lockdown, right? Work from home. Victorian new health minister has refused to rule out mask mandates and working from home orders as COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations continue to surge. Wild stuff, folks. All right, briefly, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not ask for your phone number, does not mine your data, and does not upload your contacts. It functions by adding people you know, then adding their secure numbers, and you can still chat with non-secure users just by sending them an invite. Secure protects you from getting hacked, from hackers getting onto your phone, and you have full privacy while you're on the app. Now, it's $5 for the Messenger and only $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. All right, folks, that said, we're going to jump over to Epic TV exclusively for this next part. I want to talk about this Marburg virus. Now, we've been talking about for a while now monkeypox, a very disturbing looking virus that gives you boils. It seems that the initial public concern of it died out to a large extent, because initially people were like, oh man, I hope I don't get that. It's, it gives you nasty boils and it looks really disturbing. It turns out it's mostly being transmitted among homosexual men, right? It's mostly among gay men it's being transmitted, which means that people didn't see it as a broad health crisis. But now there's a new one, a new hemorrhagic fever, and this is the Marburg virus, which is apparently very deadly. Spreading in Africa currently, but also getting a lot of attention globally. We're going to talk about this in just a bit. We're going to jump over to Epic TV for this. Those of you who don't have an Epic TV account, remember we do an hour-and-a-half show every day, so a lot of the show is still going. Folks, before we jump over, I want to show you a quick trailer. It's the deadliest ideology of the 20th century. This is Elizabeth Spalding on the first U.S. museum honoring the victims of communism. Let me show you this, and we'll jump over to Epic TV afterwards.
We were having brunch one Sunday after church, and it was just a couple of months after the wall fell. And my mother said, there should be some sort of memorial and museum to the victims of communism.
Today I sit down with Dr. Elizabeth Spalding, founding director of the Victims of Communism Museum, the first museum in America honoring the over 100 million people killed by communism in the last century.
And the state is above all. The party is above all. There's no transcendent truth. Then everything must serve or be made to serve the state. So it means all life is cheap in comparison to that.
As well as the millions more who continue to suffer under communist dictatorships to this day.
Some people don't understand that it affects every little choice, right? Everything, every day, somebody living under the conditions of communism, they have to make a choice.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
All right, folks, a great interview to watch, actually. Something becoming more relevant, unfortunately, as well, but important to know about. That said, folks, see you on Epic TV. We're jumping over now. All right. Those of you curious, today's tea is ginseng tea. Actually, I remember I used to do the show at my home, and so I brought a bunch of my tea to the office now because I had kind of a shorter supply in the office.